The whip sang once more, and the morning seemed to flinch with it. Copper Ridge held its breath. Dust hung in the square like smoke that wouldn't rise, and the sun spilled over the false fronts of the general store and saloon, turning every window to a cold, watching eye. Cordelia Hayes did not cry out. She stood bound to the post, jaw locked, green eyes bright as river glass after flood, the welted map of pain drying on her back. Blood made thin threads, bright as sewing silk, slipping into the torn hem of her calico. A fly landed, tried its luck, and was dismissed with a small shudder of her shoulder that looked, to the crowd, like pride. Mayor Edmund Carver cleared his throat and tried to sound like law. "This is what comes of forgetting place," he said, voice swelling and empty as a church bell rung for a stranger. "Miss Hayes has refused a lawful arrangement, thrice." His hand shook the papers he didn't need. Behind him, Silas Murdoch leaned his bulk against the water trough, all barrel chest and easy cruelty, thumb stroking the edge of his holster as though it were a favored dog. "Say yes, and you'll be washed and wed before noon," Murdoch called. "New dress. Fresh start." Cordelia spat, and the sun caught the arc as if it were silver. "I'd rather bleed honest than live false." Murmurs pricked the crowd. Old Mrs. Patterson tucked her rosary deeper into a work-worn fist. Young Jimmy Reeves swallowed like a man with a fishbone lodged sideways in his throat. Men shifted their boots and didn't meet one another's eyes. Such things were done in Copper Ridge, deeds signed in back rooms where whiskey dulled tongues, and the town kept going because the mine kept chewing and the cattle kept moving. But public shame had a weight even the boldest bully struggled to lift. Deputy's arm rose. Leather hissed. The square shrank to one taut line of air. Hooves entered that air with the slow, steady certainty of a verdict. He came in riding a black horse that carried its head like a blade. Tall man, shoulders built for burden, hat brim shadowing eyes the steel color of creek water when the winter runs it low. He slid from the saddle with a soldier's ease and a rancher's quiet. Spurs clinked once, patient as a clock. Thaddius Rockwell did not tip his hat. He looked at the post, at the girl, at the crowd that would not choose, and then at Murdoch the way a man looks at a rattler to see if the tale will warn before the strike. "Cut her down," he said. The words were soft. They hit like iron. Carver found his dignity and lost it all at once. "Now see here. This is municipal business. Nothing to do with you, Mr. Rockwell." Thaddeus stepped close enough for Cordelia to see the small crescent scar along his cheek, a pale half-moon where a saber had once said no. His hand settled on the grip of a Colt that had known hot work. The other hand hung loose, palm open, as if to show there was room in him for mercy still. "What's your name?" he asked her, and his voice, unlike the mayor's, did not need to rise to be heard. "Cordelia Hayes," she said, and hated the tremor. "Miss Hayes," he said, nodding once, as though a bond had been made. "Hold steady." Carver puffed his vest and reached for outrage. "Mr. Rockwell, this is a legal contract for the payment of you selling women now, Carver." Thaddeus didn't turn his head. Murdoch's smile was the fat kind, too used to its own comfort to be ashamed. "She's collateral. Daddy borrowed against my winter herd. Daddy died. That stands. She works it or weds it. Charity, Rockwell. Charity's a word men like you put around noose, so it looks like a necklace," Thaddeus said. In the stillness that followed, the town could hear its own heart. Murdoch's hired men edged wider, the way wolves test the snow for crust. Hands drifted down, found leather, rested there to feel brave. The deputy lifted the whip as though he could unring the bell with one more swing. "Cut her down." The pistol came out of Thaddeus Rockwell as if it had been part of his arm the whole of his life. First shot snapped the air in two and punched the hired gun's shoulder into red ruin before the man even saw his mistake. Second shot clipped a wrist, and the scuffed iron in it spun bit the dust like a thrown horseshoe. Third man took inventory of his soul and decided it should keep breathing. "Anyone else want to dance?" Thaddeus asked, as mild as Sunday, and it was terrible because it was not a boast. The deputy's knife, trembling, found rope. Cordelia fell forward into Thaddius's hands, breath catching, the world blooming with pain and something like relief that tasted of salt and shame and God's own lightning. He steadied her as though she were made of porcelain and rage. "Easy," he said, and she thought the word could be a promise if she let it. "Doc," Thaddius called, eyes still on Murdoch. "Now!" The town did not move. "I said now." Jimmy Reeves ran like a boy trying to outrun growing up. Murdoch found his bravado near the trough. "You just set yourself against men with friends, Rockwell. Governor Seal clicks when I whistle. Folks will come hunting you with paper and badge both." Thaddius tilted his head, considering a far horizon only he could see. "Then I reckon I'd best make sure they remember why they came." He turned to Cordelia, and she lifted her chin because she would not see pity and live with it. She saw something else there, something like anger harnessed to duty. It steadied her more than the arm at her back. "This woman is under my protection," Thaddius told the square. "You put so much as a shadow on her. You answer to me." On the hill above the livery, a lone rider wheeled a bay and lit dirt toward the county seat, fear riding pillion. The square exhaled for the first time in minutes. Doc Morrison burst from his office with a bag and hands that shook like leaves in a lightning storm. "These cuts'll scar," he muttered as he cleaned and bound, salve stinging like a memory that wouldn't quite fade. "But she'll live if she doesn't get herself killed staying put." Thaddius posted himself at the window, a tall figure drawn in the glass with the town and its choices behind him. The colt, cleaned by habit without looking, slid home. "How long till she rides?" he asked. "Rides?" Cordelia said, and winced at how weak the word sounded. "I ain't leaving. This place is a door with no latch," Thaddius replied. "Men like Murdoch don't sleep when their will's been crossed. Men like Carver dream in warrants. By sundown, you'll have law enough to paper the whole street." Doc's hands paused. "What about law for Murdoch? For this shame? Law like that costs money and friends," Thaddius said. "Murdoch's got both. You got your name and a back full of lines that'll itch when the summer comes." Cordelia drew herself up, bandages pulling tight, pain making sparks in her eyes. "This is my home. They'll not drive me from it." Thaddius looked at her a long time, and she had the sense he was measuring not her words but the steel beneath them. "They will try to break you here in public, Miss Hayes, till you bow your head and call it prayer. Better to die standing," she said. He nodded once, like a man tasting truth on his tongue. "Better still to live standing." Hooves again, this time not steady but swift, many of them, angry as wasps. The window filled with dust rolling in like a storm fallen out of the mountains. Jimmy's voice tripped through the door. "Riders. South Road. A dozen. Maybe more." Thaddius checked the sky. It had taken less time than he'd hoped and more than he'd feared. "We have minutes." He turned to Cordelia. "Decide." She looked at him as a person looks at a bridge after flood, wondering if it will hold. "Why?" she asked. "Why step into my trouble? You don't know me." He took down a small leather roll from Doc's shelf, bandages and needle tucked inside, and cinched it with a ranger's knot. He answered without the easy poetry of a man, making himself look good. "Because there's days a man forgets why he's still breathing. And then he walks into a square and remembers." Doc set a small bottle of laudanum on the table and refused his own fear. "There's a back trail through Miller's Canyon," he said. "Fox Path. You ride it hard. You'll touch the territorial line before dark." "And then what?" Cordelia asked, and hated the child sound in it. "Then you keep riding," Thaddius said, "or you don't. But it'll be your say, not theirs." He held out his hand. "Live free or die here. Decide." Outside, brass badges winked like winter stars. The first marshal shouted, and the town flinched because his voice sounded like a door slamming. Cordelia looked at the hand that had cut her down. She looked at Copper Ridge, which had watched her bleed and called it order. She remembered her father's lessons, the old ones from before fever took him, how he'd taught her a rifle's balance and a mare's temper, and how 1-0 held the size of 100 yes, if you meant it. She took Thaddius Rockwell's hand. They slipped through the back like thieves from a house on fire. Thaddius's black stood saddled, breath steady as a bellows. Doc held a small dun mare by the halter, older, sure-footed, the kind that didn't argue with bad ground. Cordelia swung up with the sound bitten off between her teeth. The morning smelled of sun-hot pine pitch and the acrid whisper of spent powder. Down the alley, the marshals poured into the square, questions wearing Law's face. "That way," Thaddius said, and the dun mare answered before she did, because some animals know when a human's choice is a last plank over deep water. They took the narrow between Murphy's barn and the barrel maker's shed, hooves sparking off stone. A shout snapped behind. "There, ride," Thaddius said, and the one word hit her spine like a spur made of courage. They reached the scrub at the town's edge as the first rifle cracked. The bullet took a sliver of bark from a juniper at Cordelia's shoulder and made the tree smell like Christmas in a place where Christmas had mostly always been hunger. Miller's Canyon opened its red mouth before them. Rock walls rose, banded with quartz and old time. Shadows cool, as well water pooled under ledges where swallows wrote loops on the air. The trail there narrowed to one horse, the land's way of forcing humility, and their pursuers strung out behind them. The noise of the chase long and loud and ragged. "How far?" Cordelia called, breath stealing itself from her ribs with each jolt. She tasted dust like ground bone. 5 miles to the lip," Thaddius answered. 10 more across open. We'll know by the Crowfeather Grove whether we live to pick our route." She grinned despite the pain, because even in running, his talk carried maps. "You sound like a man who's run before." "I sound like a man who intends to lead you home," he said, and it was the first time the word home had meant something more than a street full of people who preferred comfort to courage. Shots yipped in the canyon's throat like coyotes. The law was closing, hunger teaching it speed. The dun mare found edges as though she'd grown from them. Thaddius's black climbed in quick, measured surges, hooves taking to stone like scripture taken to memory. "Thaddius," Cordelia said, low and plain, because truth sometimes must be paid in full before a long climb. "Murdoch lied about much, but not all. There is debt. Not to him." "To who?" She dared the answer. "Marshal Kane." Silence took one full stride, heavy as a pall. Then Thaddius's voice came like a rasp over flint. "Figures. Some men wear a badge to weigh down their guilt. He lent 500 when the fever took half our herd," she said. "Papa meant to pay after roundup. Death took the schedule. Kane took the ledger and wrote a woman in," Thaddius said, and anger lived under the words. "Banked like coals a patient man keeps for midwinter." A shot came close enough to lift Thaddius's hat brim. He didn't duck. He never seemed to, and something in that steadied Cordelia more than any promised safety. There are men you follow because they walk toward what most walk from. They reached the fork where shadow pooled deeper than noon. Left was the canyon's honest path, long, low, slow death by pursuit. Right was a knife-edged cut angling up towards sky. Not quite a trail, more a stubborn idea the land had tried and never finished. Cordelia pointed with her chin. "Papa used to take me there hunting. Leads to the mesa." Thaddius looked, weighed shale against horseflesh, fall against pursuit. Behind, Marshal Kane hooped like a man who liked the sound of fear wearing a skirt. "That's not a trail," Thaddius said. "It's not a whipping post either," Cordelia said. "Choose." His smile flickered, quick and thin, the way a man smiles when the math comes out ugly but clean. Up we go. They climbed into a world made of two things, gravity and will. Hooves skittered and caught. Stone clattered down, a song of risk. Cordelia fixed her eyes on the dun's ears, their steady twitch, the way they asked the ground small questions and got small answers. She didn't look down. She did not think of the post, or the square, or the crowd. She thought of a stove's blue flame on winter mornings and fresh coffee in a window that faced east. Halfway, a rifle cracked and spat fire chips from a rock by Thaddius's knee. "Surrender the woman, Rockwell." Kane's voice climbed hand over hand to them. "Do it and stand a chance." Thaddius answered without turning. "Lawman, you ain't carrying mercy in your satchel today. Go home." The last pitch was the worst. Then they were up, and the mesa opened around them, flat as a table God uses when he writes what will stand. Far off, a thin smear of timber marked the territorial line, and beyond it, a promise called "Not here." Thaddius turned his head, scanning north with a scout's eyes. There, smoke lifting from a low cluster of roofs. Cordelia saw hope take shape on his mouth. "Trading post," he said. "Crow feathers people. If hospitality still means what my life remembers, we might find a fence the badge won't cross. Can we make it? If wanting were speed, we'd be there already," he said, and set his heels to the black. They ran the mesa as the sun slid west and bled the land gold. The wind raised the smell of sage and old rain from the soil and pushed the sweat into their eyes till the world warped with salt. Behind, Kane's men topped the rim, small as guilt made public and set to gaining. The post grew larger, a fort of rails and right angles, smoke writing lazy letters into the late sky. As they came within a stone's good throw, men stepped from the shadows with rifles held in hands that knew respect more than anger. A tall chief with hair braided like a river's edge and scars that said he'd learned pain and chosen patience raised his palm. "Who comes?" His voice was river rock, worn, steady. "Thaddius Rockwell." Thaddius called back, and something gentle flickered at the edge of his iron. "Asking sanctuary." "For the woman." The chief's face thawed to recognition. Then the edges in it returned properly. "Brother," he said, "you return with trouble riding your flank." "Trouble wearing a badge," Thaddius said, "and a debt that was never hers." The gate swung as though it had been waiting all day to do it. The dun mare stumbled once in the yard, then stood as if embarrassed. Cordelia slid down and swallowed a shout as her back reminded her of the post and the whip and the square. The chief's women moved forward with bowls steaming herbs that smelled of pine and bitter tea. "She is under my protection," Thaddius said, and looked at Cordelia when he said it, as if the words needed her, too, to make them true. The chief's mouth made a thin smile. "Same thing," he said. Beyond the fence, Marshal Kane's men fanned in a crescent, rifles bristling like a curtain of iron hung sloppy. Kane's voice carried the distance clean. "You're harboring fugitives. Law says hand them over. This fence is a line the law you bring cannot read," the chief said, stepping out into plain sight. His warriors flowered at his shoulders like patience armed. "We know your kind of paper." Kane spat. "You got 1 hour." Inside, night came careful, touching lamp to lamp, healing to wound. Cordelia lay on buffalo robes that smelled of smoke and years in story. A woman with hair the color of winter wheat brushed salve on her back with fingers that never shook. Thaddius stood at a window where dawn would eventually be. Coffee steamed in the chief's hands and in Thaddius's. Between them passed things men carry when they have run out of words. Wait, watchfulness, the memory of winter. "There's a count between you and Kane," the chief said at last, staring in his steam as though it held maps. "3 winters passed, he burned our stores for tribute we did not owe. We buried our elders with the snow. I have been waiting for a price to name." Thaddius finished his coffee and set the tin down as if it were a stone at the base of a marked grave. "In the morning," he said, "you'll have your line to hold, and I'll have mine." Cordelia listened to the men trading truth and knew that somewhere between the square and this room, the world had turned so slightly the old horizon did not fit her eyes. She closed them. Sleep came the way a mercy sometimes does in the West. Late, hard-earned, and without apology. Outside, wolves of a different sort kept the night. Dawn came thin, the kind of gray that remembers night and doesn't quite trust morning yet. The trading post yard held its breath. The fences ticked as they cooled, and a coyote far off put a question into the last rag of darkness and got no answer worth keeping. Cordelia woke to the ache of new skin pulling at old pain. Smoke from the cook fire drifted through a seam in the shutter with the scent of coffee and fatback. Someone had set a tin cup within reach and a folded scrap of muslin clean as Sunday. She drank slow. Heat settled her chest the way a hand settles a skittish colt. When she sat, the salve tugged, and she caught her breath, swallowed it, told herself she would not be ruled by a back that had learned a man's lesson without learning the man's permission. Outside, Thaddius was talking with the chief. His words came few and low, like a man measuring boards before the nails start. Cordelia pushed her feet into borrowed boots a size too big and walked to the doorway. Joseph Crow Feather stood with his rifle down, which meant he was ready, not to shoot, ready to decide. Thaddius had his thumbs hooked on his belt, which looked idle till you noticed the Colt's grip within a finger's thought. Cain and his men sat their horses beyond the split rails, a patchy string of grudge in dusty hats. The light had not yet found their faces. Their rifles were already bright. Cain's voice lifted. "Time's up, Chief. Send the white girl and the man who stole her." "Stolen things make no sound when they return to the proper hand," Joseph replied. "This woman is not a thing." Cain's jaw worked at that. He wanted to say something meaner, but the words jammed themselves in his teeth and refused. He spat instead. "Law says your law was set down by men who sell what isn't theirs to pay for what they shouldn't have bought," Joseph said. "You want a sermon? Go to the church in town." Thaddius stepped into the gate mouth, the morning pinning his shadow to the packed earth like a sign. "Cain," he said, and the name came out like a stone set in a wall. "You lent a dying man 500 and came to collect his daughter when the ground took him first. That about the sum of it?" Cain smiled, all teeth and no humor. "I lent an able man 500 on cattle collateral. The cattle died. The man died. The debt lived like a child does. I came to collect on the living part. That's the way of the world." "The world's way is a poor excuse for a man's choice," Thaddius said. Cain tapped his badge with one knuckle. "Choice is what a badge spares a man from. Paper makes the decision for him." "The paper didn't write itself," Cordelia said sharply from the doorway, surprising herself. A hand pushed that pen. Cain finally looked at her fully, and Cordelia had the sickened sensation of being appraised like stock. "Morning, Miss Hayes," he said. "You caused a ruckus yesterday. Best we set things right." Cordelia felt Thaddius's glance, quick, steadying. She lifted her chin. "Best you set yourself right." A murmur went down Cain's line. Some men like their cruelty quiet. Some don't like it named. Cain's face didn't change. "You got 1 minute, Rockwell. Then we take the gate." Joseph's warriors shifted, not back, forward. No wasted movement, just a story the body tells the blood to keep it brave. Thaddius looked at the line, counted distances the way a blacksmith counts hammer blows, to judge temper. The yard would be a killing ground if it came to that. And when the smoke cleared, there'd be widows cooking for fewer mouths and boys learning to talk without their fathers' voices to correct them. He had buried enough cost to know the worth of trying soft before hard. He turned to Joseph. "May I try a poor man's treaty first?" Joseph nodded once, sorrow and consent in the motion. "Do what you must. I will do what I vowed." Thaddius stepped beyond the gate, empty hands open to show he held more nerve than metal. The sun found him then, and his shadow moved like a second horse beside him. "Cain," he said conversationally, as if they were at a saloon rail and not on the lip of a small war. "You reckon the debt's 500. Plus interest," Cain said. "Interest is a word men put on top of another word to see if it breaks," Thaddius answered. He reached into his vest and drew out a leather pouch. He tossed it. It thumped dull against the dust at Cain's horse's feet. The sound of coin is a sound even a proud man hears. "There's your number. Count it or don't. Either way, the debt's paid." Cain didn't look down. "You think I came all this way for coin?" He laughed, short as a cough. "I came for lesson. Folks in Copper Ridge learn a thing when a woman who mouths law gets led back tied to his saddle horn." Something tightened across Thaddius's face, the way a rope tightens when it takes full weight. "You ain't taking her," he said. Cain's eyes went flat, like a snake's when it's halfway between deciding to bite and deciding to bask. "Boys," he said, and the rifles lifted. "We'll cut them down," Joseph murmured to Thaddius without moving his lips. "We will lose half, and they will run. Blood buys time." "Time for what?" Thaddius asked. "To move the woman." Joseph's hand brushed the cuff of Thaddius's coat, a small, human touch in a morning built of flint. "To move you." Thaddius shook his head once. He raised his voice so it could carry where it needed to. Cain, you fire on sovereign ground, and this territory will remember you as the man who lit a war to collect on a lie. You ready to be history's fool? Cain's smile sharpened. History forgets what doesn't please it. Not always, Cordelia said, stepping to the fence line, bandaged and pale and full of a steadiness she didn't recognize as her own until it stood under her like a second spine. Sometimes it tells the truth just to spite men like you. Cain's jaw twitched, then something unexpected passed across his face. Regret, quickly smothered. Bring me the girl, he told his men. I'll spare the rest. A young deputy toward the back yanked his reins, startled. His horse sidestepped. Marshal, do it, Cain snapped. You'll cross that fence, Joseph said, voice soft as a prayer spoken so the wind won't hear. And you will not return. A silence fell then that seemed to tug even at the sun. Cain's men looked at one another and found less courage in their neighbors' faces than they hoped. Two began to dismount, movements reluctant as molasses in January. One man's boot missed the stirrup, and the shame of it traveled the line like rumor. Thaddius spoke again, quicker now, because time had shifted into that narrow neck a man pours everything through when the glass is almost empty. Cain, I'll give you something you can lay against your pride without spilling more blood. You want her because she stands for your claim. Take the claim instead. Take the paper that says the debt lives. Cain blinked. What? Thaddius turned to Cordelia. Miss Hayes. She didn't understand at first, then she did, and her stomach dropped as if the floor had given way. No, Thaddius held her eyes, and in them she saw the shape of something he hadn't spoken. The way he took other people's blows like a man takes weather. Not because he enjoys rain, but because the land needs what follows. Let me do this, he said quietly. Let me change what this paper says. Cordelia's mouth was dry. You ain't writing my life in your hand. I'm signing mine to yours and giving it back, he said. There's difference. She understood and hated that she did. Hated the need of the world to demand sacrifice to oil its gears. Hated that here, on this morning, love had chosen a language written in ledgers. What are you babbling? Cain sneered. Thaddius ignored him. He reached into his coat again and drew out a folded packet tied with a rawhide thong. The sort of paper a man keeps under floorboards and over his heart. Rockwell Ranch, he said. 6,000 acres of graze and scrub, 2 good wells, a creek that runs gentle even when summer forgets to rain. A house with a roof a man could be proud to die under. My brand, my cattle, my name, all of it, to the territorial bank, to be held against the Hayes note. He lifted his head and gave Cain the look of a man who has faced worse odds in narrower places. Debt paid. Twice. With interest so rich you'll choke on it. Cain stared as if the morning had slipped out from under him. You'd sign your land for a woman you met yesterday? Thaddius's mouth twitched, something like the ghost of a smile or the shadow of grief. I had yesterday to learn her worth, he said. Turns out it's the kind of man spends gladly and calls himself richer. It landed like a gunshot in the yard, not a bargain, a vow. Joseph's gaze shifted to Cordelia, and she felt the weight of a nation's old patience settle with a gentleness that broke her heart clean, because it was made of respect and sorrow both. Cain found his balance, but it was less steady. This is theater, he said. You think you wound me by dressing your surrender in poetry? Sign what you like. The girl goes with me. Then this is between you and me, Thaddius said. You leave her be, and you and I will finish what Tombstone started. Cain's eyes flicked. Tombstone. Thaddius did not look away. There are things a man lays in the ground and prays never to dig up. You know mine. The yard hummed, a sound without voice. Cordelia saw it then, a scar not on the skin but under it. The shape of a grave Thaddius had carried west and tried to outpace. She felt a fury rise in her at this world that makes a man pay twice for learning to be kind. She stepped forward, silk threads of bandage dragging fire along her back, and pushed the gate with her hip to stand at Thaddius's shoulder. I ain't a horse to be traded, she said to both men. Thaddius's hand hovered near her elbow, not touching, ready if she swayed. "You're right," he said. "You are your own reckoning. But let me throw my weight on the side that keeps you standing." Joseph lifted a hand slightly, a father's motion. "Daughter," he said, "let a man do his work when it is the right work. It does not take your work from you." The world held its breath to hear what the woman would do. Cordelia closed her eyes just long enough to see her father's face as he leaned over the small table, counting coins that wouldn't carry them through winter, the way his thumb rubbed the edges, as if he could make them multiply with love. She opened them. "Fine," she said. "We pay your paper with a better paper. But make no mistake, Marshal, this ain't mercy. This is delay. You'll answer to a different kind of court in the end." Cain's nostrils flared. "Bring me the deed," he said roughly, hiding the flicker of victory before it could show. "We'll see if the governor enjoys this little melodrama." Joseph signaled, and a boy too young to grow whiskers sprinted to the small office off the trading room, where Joseph kept the ledger for white men's comfort. Minutes later, Thaddius's deed lay on a desk that had known treaties and lies and births and deaths, and Joseph's wife set a lamp beside it, though the sun was fully up now, as if to remind everyone present that light is a thing men sometimes must add by hand. Thaddius signed with a hand that didn't shake. The ink glistened. Cordelia watched his name bleed into the paper fibers and felt an absurd, fierce desire to blot it dry with the hem of her skirt, to keep it safe from smearing. He tied it with the thong and handed it to Cain, who took it with fingers that telegraphed greed and triumph both. "There," Cain said softly. "Now you can say you gave the world to save a woman. Maybe there's a poem in it. Maybe folks will sing. Maybe," Thaddius said just as soft, "or maybe they'll say, I traded dirt for something that breathes." Cain tucked the packet away, and for a heartbeat, some tiny decent thing in him looked out through his eyes and then scuttled back to its burrow. He jerked his chin at his men. "We're done." His gaze flicked to Cordelia and lingered one blink too long. For now, they turned their horses and trotted off, dust erasing their tracks with an efficiency that would shame an honest man. The yard did not cheer. It exhaled. Joseph's warriors lowered their rifles as men do when they're still listening to the air for the sound of the last bullet. Inside, Cordelia leaned against the wall and let her knees tell the rest of her that they had been holding up more than their fair share. Thaddius stood in the doorway with his thumbs hooked again, as if nothing had happened. His face betrayed nothing except the faintest settling, like a house taking a new weight without cracking. Joseph came to him and set a hand on his forearm. "You have put your brand on something no man can rustle," he said. Thaddius nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement of a compliment he did not know how to own. "Thank you for the line you held." Joseph's eyes warmed. "We hold lines together. That is the only kind that lasts." Cordelia pushed off the wall and crossed to Thaddius. She set her hand flat on his chest where, under the wool, the steadiness lived. "You fool," she said, but her voice was too thick to carry bite. "You gave away a house I hadn't chosen yet." "I gave it to a paper," he said, "not to a man. Paper don't know what a home is." "Do you?" she asked, and anger left her as quickly as it had come, like a sudden storm that spins itself on one field and moves on. His answer was not words. He looked at her like a man looks at the edge of land where the river widens and he can see, at last, where the ferry might cross if a rope can be strung. "I know where I'd build one," he said finally, "if a woman said so." Cordelia's laugh was a broken thing mended in the saying. "We'll see." Joseph cleared his throat. "You must move," he said. "Cain will return with paper thicker than your pouch, and men who do not hesitate to misunderstand it. My people can spirit you as far as the dry wash where the cottonwoods grow like a prayer line. After that, horse and sky." "Where?" Cordelia asked, and both men turned to her by reflex, as if authority had moved without their noticing. Thaddius looked a question at Joseph, a map unrolled. "North and west, skirting the iron road," he said. "There's a hollow there, water in spring, shade in summer, snow you can measure with your breath in winter. No one rides to it by accident." Cordelia nodded. "Then that's where we go." Joseph lifted a palm. "I can give you 2 men and a day's grace. After that, We must not carry your trail. My debt to the dead and my duty to the living draw lines I cannot cross. 2 men in a day, Thaddius said. We've won with less. Joseph smiled, and the scars on his face softened. Always the soldier. Not always, Thaddius replied. Just today. They ate in a hurry, bread torn by hands that remembered famine and stew wolfed by folks who knew better than to trust a second bowl. Cordelia found a shirt that did not rub, a hat that sat right enough. The dun mare, rested and bandaged at the fetlock, nickered when she laid a palm on its cheek. The sound put water in Cordelia's eyes, so quick she almost laughed at herself. Before they rode, Joseph's wife took Cordelia's hands and turned them palms up. She traced each line with a fingertip stained green from herbs. You will have 3 choices, she said. You will think each is the last. None is. You will be loved. That will frighten you. Let it. Cordelia managed. Yes, ma'am. Because manners are a refuge when prophecies come handed like bread. They went out by the north gate at noon, sun high and relentless, shadows the thin knives that slice the day into slivers a man can swallow. 2 Paiute riders ghosted ahead, faces painted with the quiet geometry of intent. Joseph lifted a hand in blessing and in warning both. Thaddius swung into the black and looked once back at the yard that had given them a morning. He raised 2 fingers, no flourish. Cordelia put her heels to the dun and matched his pace with a small, stubborn pride. They rode along the fence line until the land turned from yard to world. The trading post fell behind them, small as a truth everyone knows and does not say. By sundown, they had water. By moonrise, they had distance. By the second dawn, they had only each other and the sound the horses made telling the ground a story with every stride. They camped in a cut between low hills ringed by juniper. The night smelled of hot rock giving back its day and the faint iron of Cordelia's healing. Thaddius set a small fire and kept it stingy, as if paying heed on credit. Cordelia watched the sparks climb and die and thought of papers and names and what a man sets his hand to when he means it. You ain't afraid of dying? She asked into the dark. No, ma'am, Thaddius said. Just of dying forgotten. She rolled to face the firelight, the glow smoothing the hard places into something almost tender. I'll remember, she said, and the vow surprised her by being easier than breath. He closed his eyes and slept like a man who has finally put his back against something that will hold through the night. They left the last of Joseph's men at the cottonwoods, where the wind turned the leaves silver and the water whispered the kind of secrets a man only hears if he has already lost enough to stop asking. The riders touched palms. No speeches, no flint. Then melted back into the brush, their ponies taking the ground like a promise to return if summoned by smoke. Beyond the wash the earth rolled and opened, a quilt of grama and bare patches stitched with game trails. The sky went up forever, gunmetal at the rim and a hard blue hammered thin overhead. Somewhere a hawk rode a slow circle on the day, inked in patience. The iron road lay to the south, black ties, steel rails, telegraph poles marching neat as soldiers, and Thaddius kept it on their far shoulder, knowing that wires carry news faster than hooves, and the wrong word sent the wrong way could turn the whole West against 2 names by supper. They spoke little. Words spent water, and water was dear. When Cordelia did talk, it was to lay a fact on the table like a clean knife and watch how the light took it. Papa used to tell me, she said mid-morning, the land don't dislike you. It just don't know you yet. Thaddius nodded. That's true of men, too. Is it? She glanced at him under the tilt of a hat brim that had known a better head. Feels like some men decide early they don't care to learn. Then the fault's theirs, he said, and the softness in it was unexpected even to him. Not yours. By noon their horses blew hard, and the sun reeled like a drunkard looking for a fight. They found a mesquite stub of shade and slid down into it, easing leather and aching bone. Thaddius cut jerky with a quiet knife and handed her a strip. She chewed as if the act itself might force her to live through another mile. Sweat salted her lips. She tasted iron when she swallowed and pretended not to. Tell me the tombstone of it, she said without looking up. I hear a name. I see a shadow on your face." "The shadow belongs," he said. "Leave it be." "You gave away your house on my head," Cordelia replied, equal parts tender and plain. "You ain't buying silence with it. You're buying a say." He drew breath slow. The mesquite's thorn scored small black arrows against the sky, pointing everywhere and nowhere both. "There was a street," he began at last, "that held more dead men's last looks than any graveyard you'd care to name. There was a girl who used to knot my neck scarf and say it made me look like a man instead of a blade. Sarah, she wanted a school, wanted a window that faced east so the morning could find the chalk dust easy. I left a man breathing that shouldn't be been. Called it mercy. He came back with 4 more and a shotgun. The window broke. The morning didn't care for the dust. I learned a lesson, and I took it out past the last mile marker and tried to bury it where God himself might forget." Cordelia listened the way a parched field listens for thunder. When he finished, she said only, "You ain't the blade you think. Blades don't keep folks warm." He stood and reset the cinch. They cut blankets from bigger cloth. They rode again. The afternoon leaned toward them with that bleak affection deserts reserved for the stubborn. They threaded a shallow draw, followed a deer path that turned to rock, and asked more of the horses than was polite. The dun stumbled. Cordelia was off before the mare had fully wronged herself. Hand on the gaskin, voice low. "Easy, girl. Easy now. I won't ask you to carry what I can step." The mare blew and settled. Thaddius watched the way Cordelia's palm flattened where strength and mercy meet and thought. That's what a roof feels like from underneath. They made the hollow by late day. 2 low hills shouldering a seam of cottonwood. A basin scooped from wind's old work. A pool no bigger than a man's fear cupped by stone and shaded in the hour when even rattlers choose sleep. Thaddius let out a breath. He did not know he had been rationing. "It's smaller than the story," Cordelia said. "That's how you know it's true," he answered. "Stories either grow or shrink when you arrive. The right ones go to fit." They unsaddled and walked the horses to the water. The black plunged his lips in and sucked, chest heaving with thank you. The dun took 2 careful swallows, looked to Cordelia for permission, then drank like forgiveness. They built no fire. The heat in the ground came up like a second camp, and they sat with their backs to a boulder still warm with sun. The sky turned the color of bruised plums at the edge and held one star like a nail driven clean. Coyotes tuned their song in the middle distance, and a night hawk stitched sound to dark with its odd, lonely call. That was when Cordelia told him the thing she had been turning with the stubborn care a woman uses to knead tough dough until it learns to be bread. "Mayor Carver's paperbacks," she said. "Paperbacks." Thaddeus smiled for the first time since the day learned their names. "You planning to read me to sleep?" "I ain't talking dime novels," she said. "I mean his ledger, the one under the false bottom in his desk. I clean his office on Mondays to pay for ink at the general store. Saw him slide it in and out when he thought no one looking. Saw Murdoch's marking it. Saw Kane's." The smile fled. "You sure?" "Only thing I'm sure of is sins prefer company," she said. "But I know his hands. They shake when he writes numbers too big to say out loud." Thaddeus turned that over slow. "A ledger is a kind of gun that doesn't run out of bullets. Carver won't give it up. He will if folks see," she replied. "Men like him ain't afraid of God. They're afraid of neighbors. Neighbors sometimes choose comfort over truth. Sometimes." She turned her bandaged back from the stone and winced as the cloth tugged. "But I stood in a square and bled. There were eyes that looked away because looking is costly, and there were eyes that couldn't." Mrs. Patterson's hands shook like a wet dog. Jimmy Reeves went white as lye soap. "You give them something to hold, they'll steady." He looked at her profile cut clean against a strip of sky where the Milky Way spilled like a wagon's flour barrel busted open, and he thought of Sarah's east window and the way light pours even into rooms men have darkened on purpose. "You want to go back," he said. It was not judgment, only comprehension's flat tone when it arrives on time. "I want to end it for more than me," she answered. "I don't know if I'm that brave, but I know I can't be otherwise." "Kane won't rest," he said. "Nor will I," she said softly. He waited. She went on. "I ain't asking you. He let the silence sit a while, because it had earned the right. Then he said, I took a debt with my name to pay yours. That didn't purchase a say. It earned one, and I'm spending it. We'll go back. She turned, surprised by how simple he made the terrible. You sure? No, ma'am, he said, mouth tilting. I'm loud about doubt, but I know a fight when it's worth the bandages. They slept in snatches. The night lifted and dropped weight as if testing the seam of the world. Toward false dawn, the horses went rigid and pointed their ears at the dark nothing to the west. Thaddius's hand found the colt in the same motion that rolled him to a knee. Company, Cordelia breathed. Maybe coyotes, he said, listening to the air like a man listens to the tone a bottle makes when it's near empty. The sound came again, rock knocked softly against rock, not the loose skitter of a badger, not the quick tap of a rabbit's fear. Hooves, careful. Men who think quiet can make them invisible. Men who haven't learned the night sees different than day. He reached and smudged the fire's last glow with 2 fingers. The dark adjusted and showed him 2 forms breaking the hill's edge low, then a third hanging back, coward cautious, which is the most dangerous kind because it never comes or goes fully. He counted the gaps between each sound. 3 riders. No, 4. One held his mount as if it were a piece of furniture to be arranged in a room, not a second heart. That would be Cain. They came slow until the first horse set a hoof on scree and dragged a small avalanche below its frog. The sound rolled down into the hollow, loud enough to wake the dead, soft enough that only the living would choose to lie still after. Show yourselves. Thaddius called, voice wide with false ease. He stood colt low, not pointed. A man's hands talk. It said, you can run, you can stay, you can die. I'm fine either way. Cain walked his horse forward 2 more steps and stopped where the small lip of the basin made a silhouette of his hat brim against the stars. Morning, he said, voice raw. Didn't figure you'd choose a hole with only one way out. I didn't, Thaddius said. There's a second cut. Cain's chuckle scraped like a rake across gravel. And I didn't bring enough men to cover it? Don't be greener than your name says. Cordelia stood up beside Thaddius, not at his back but shoulder, and in the half-dark the shape of them struck Cain like a care he hadn't planned for. He hit it with a sneer. Miss Hayes, he said lightly, I got paper on you twice now. Carver's and mine. Cordelia's voice came even. I got more paper than that. The sky, the ground. Write your name on either and see if they read it back. One of the men behind Cain shifted. Marshal, we don't hush, Cain hissed. 4 men to steal a woman. Thaddius said, seems small for a big badge. Call it a courtesy, Cain said. Didn't want a crowd to forget you easily. Thaddius tipped his head toward the saddle roll hanging on the black's cantle. There's a canteen. Toss it. Cain frowned. Your men sound like whistles, Thaddius said. Dry ones. They'll shoot better, and I want this fair. Cain almost laughed. You always like to make sermons around gunfights. I like to give a man a reason he'll be proud to tell later, Thaddius replied. Even if he lies about who fired first. Cain gestured. A younger deputy kneed his horse forward and flicked a canteen. It hit dust and rolled to Thaddius's boot. Thaddius picked it up and lobbed it back higher than he needed to, a slow underhanded arc any drunk could catch. The younger man caught it half out of surprise, half out of thirst, and drank before Cain could snarl. The water made a soft sound like a hand smoothing a child's hair. The boy's shoulders settled. He lowered his gun without meaning to. Cain noticed and made a mark inside his skull on a list that had too many lines already. Here's the bargain, Cain said, spurs twitching. You give me the girl. I give you until sundown to find a priest, write a letter, squeal at the sky. When the sun tips its hat to evening, I come for you. That ain't a bargain, Cordelia said. That's a joke said too loud in church. Then here's the truth, Cain snapped. I'm taking you either way. Might as well let your hero choose them. Or, Thaddius said, we skip the singing and teach the town a new song. Cain's horse tossed its head. Cain sat deeper. What town? Copper Ridge, Thaddius said. High noon. You bring your paper. I bring mine. Carver brings his ledger or his soul. We set your claim on a barrel where Mrs. Patterson and Jimmy Reeves and the preacher's wife can read the sums like they're psalms. We let them say out loud what men like you prefer whispered. Cain's face stilled. You think neighbors will save you? No, Thaddius said. I think they'll save themselves. Cain took a long breath that couldn't quite fill him. And if I decline this grand theater? Then you die in a wash at dawn, Thaddius said regretfully. And the coyotes who eat you will be the only creatures in this world who ever held you gently. Silence went out across the basin and back, came home unchanged. Cain's hand went to the reins and stilled. He had sense enough to know what a hollow means. Bad angles, worse wind, the way a shot echoes and doesn't tell you where from. He liked clean stages. He liked rope and public shame and the quiet way men look away to keep their peace. Noon, he said at last, like it offended him to pronounce a common word. Bring your fool papers. Bring your Indian friend if it makes the crowd gasp. Bring your badge, Cordelia said. So folks remember how bright it used to shine. Cain's eyes cut to her and back. You'll be wearing a rope by supper, he said, but the confidence didn't walk the whole way to the end of the sentence. He turned his horse. The men behind him wheeled like dogs taught to heel by kicks, not food. They rode out the way they came, just trying to make a curtain for the stage change and failing. When the dark finished swallowing them, Cordelia let her breath go and realized she had held it past sense. Thaddius still watched the lip of the basin until even the memory of hoofbeats bled into the ground. You set a fire, she said. Now we got to carry it through a house made of dry wood. That's where warmth comes from, he answered. He holstered the Colt. And sometimes mercy. They broke camp with the first good light. The hollow already looked like a place other people might have chosen once and then forgotten, which is how a sanctuary survives in a land ruled by men who mistake fences for truths. They rode hard and quiet. The Dun's ears flicked toward the road often. The black ate distance like a thing long starved. At a creek crossing where the bank's clay kept records, Thaddius pulled up and studied the riding left by shod hooves and bare feet. Posse went east at dawn, he murmured. Small herd north. A wagon heavy on the right. Axle's hair from cracking. Preacher's rig, Cordelia said. Mrs. Wilder sits on the right always. Says the left side gives her bad dreams. He glanced at her, appreciative and a touch amused. Worlds made of small remembers. They climbed the last rise before Copper Ridge under a sun that was already mean and working to get personal. The town lay below, streets squared by somebody's triad order, the church steeple pointing a warning at heaven, the livery roof patched with tin that flashed like a shutter. Folks moved in the yard of the general store with a hurry that dressed itself as calm. A school bell rang twice, then stopped, as if children had been counted and found sufficient to stop the tolling. Thaddius reined in. We walk 'em in, he said. Make it plain we ain't rushing to no gallows or gallop. They entered like weather. Noticed, discussed, not commanded. Hats tipped because that is what hats do when ridden under by certain names. Mrs. Patterson froze with a sack of flour mid-hip and whispered something that might have been Lord or finally. Jimmy Reeves came out from behind a stack of coal oil cans, went pale, then red, then thin with a purpose his bones had not yet grown a hold. He said you'd run, Jimmy blurted. He said you'd crawl. Then he don't know the ground, Cordelia said. Mayor Carver appeared at the far end of the street like a prayer in a man who doesn't pray, dragged up when company arrives, and said too loud. He had his vest on crooked and his smile tied even worse. Mr. Rockwell, he said, hands spread. Miss Hayes, I hear tell there's been a misunderstanding. Let's not. Ledger, Cordelia said. Bring it. Color fled Carver's face with such obedient speed it might have been trained. I don't. Bring it, she repeated, softer now, which made the command heavier. From the bottom drawer you think ain't seen daylight since your mother scolded you for lying and you decided not to be scolded again. People stilled. The sound of the town holding its nose before a plunge rose like heat. Carver licked his lips, laughed a noise that didn't find a landing. Miss Hayes, we don't conduct business in the street. Then I'll conduct church, she said. God don't need a roof. A figure detached from the crowd at the edge of hearing. Cain. He came in from the south with 6 men, the badge flashing little suns in quick stabs. He sat his horse square, as if his spine had been planed in a carpenter's shop to match the bevel of his pride. He saw Thaddius, saw Cordelia, saw the faces turned toward him and toward the mayor, and did what a man like him does best. He measured odds, not rights. High noon, he said with the satisfaction of a banker's stamp clapping down on paper. Let's have your theater. Joseph Crow Feather was there, too, and it startled more than one settler how unsurprised they were to see him. He stood by the church fence with 3 of his men, unarmed in the way that means we didn't bother to bring what we don't need. Eyes counted them and came up with a number smaller than the fear they generated. Carver dabbed his brow with a handkerchief. "Gentlemen, please, ledger," Thaddius said, and the word held the space of a bell toll. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Sound travels best through truths. The preacher's wife stepped forward, thin and fierce, the kind of woman who keeps death at bay with pies and hymns and the refusal to be impressed. "Edmund," she said, dropping the mayor like a too-heavy pan, "fetch the book." The town watched a man weigh his soul against the weight of other men's eyes. Carver went gray. Then, with a little hitch of something like relief, because sometimes even villains tire of their position in the pageant, he turned on his heel and went to fetch it. Cain's mouth opened to stop him. Joseph, who had not moved, said, "No." Cain looked, and in that one syllable found a width he could not cross today without drowning. He closed his mouth. He did not look at Thaddius. He did not look at Cordelia. He looked at the sky and found it larger than paper. Carver came back with a brown book that might have been a Bible if Bibles had corners soft from counting interest. He held it wrong, 2 fingers like tongs, and set on a barrel head in the middle of the street, thus made a halo of it. Folks crowded, then remembered decency and stepped a little back, not because decency demanded, but because the truth wears a wide skirt and tramples toes if you stand too close. "Read," Cordelia told Jimmy Reeves. "Me?" the boy squeaked. A hand, Mrs. Patterson's, pressed his elbows steady. "You got a school voice," Cordelia said. "Let it do Sunday work on a weekday." Jimmy swallowed and laid his palm flat to stop the tremble the whole town could see. He opened the ledger and began to read names and numbers that weren't numbers but lives turned into them. Murdoch, cattle liens, deeds of daughters in tidy script. Cain, side money, transport fees for prisoners who never made the jail. Carver, percentages that fatten like hogs in a good acorn year. With each line, faces changed shape. Something shed. Something else hardened. "Enough," Cain barked, his composure cracking like a hot plate quenched too fast. "This is stolen property," Joseph said. "Stolen things make no sound when they return to the proper hand." He had said it before. It sounded different when the whole town heard it. Cain's hand went to his gun. Thaddius's hand did not. He stepped forward with his palms open like a man walking into church unarmed, because that's how you signal faith. "We end this with daylight," he said. "You put your badge on the barrel. We put that book beside it. The town chooses which metal it wants to carry in its pocket going forward. You set yourself up as judge." Cain sneered. "I set them up," Thaddius said, tilting his chin at Mrs. Patterson, at the preacher's wife, at Jimmy, at 8 others who had buried something dear under Carver's rules and Cain's collections. "You asked for a rope this morning. I brought a mirror instead." A stillness fell that was not quiet. The West stood and watched itself, and for once it did not look away. When the last name was read and the ledger shut like a coffin, Copper Ridge chose with its eyes open. Carver went out in irons. Murdoch was driven from his own gate by men who'd sold him their pride too cheap, and Cain rode away with his badge in his pocket and the dust of shame on his boots, swearing at a horizon that no longer listened. Thaddius repaired the schoolhouse window that Sarah once dreamed about and paid for chalk by the crate. Cordelia taught letters by morning and the long arithmetic of courage by night, her scars fading slower than her fear, faster than her faith. The town learned to pass the hat before it passed a sentence. And when storms rolled in mean and undecided, folks remembered the day truth stood on a barrel that did not flinch. In that country, they say it's still, some debts ain't paid in gold. They're paid in how you live after.